Robert, we good? We're good. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll go ahead and call to order the Land Use and Natural Resources Committee meeting, and today is Thursday, April 4th. It is now beyond 1:30. We'll start our meeting this afternoon with Pledge of Allegiance, led by Director Bulhan.
Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible.
Nobody heard you.
And I haven't a brain for it. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Okay.
So pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you very much for that. Getting us started. So with that, we will, let's proceed with a roll call.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Bulhan.
Here.
Frost. Harris. Kennedy. Nisley. Absent. Kozlowski. Teeter.
Here.
Vice Chair Baines.
Flores filling
sorry.
in for Baines.
Director Flores for Baines, my apologies. Vice Chair Lozano.
Here.
Chair Villegas.
Here. All right,
Quorum.
establishes a quorum. Thank you for that. All right, so any public communication that we need, because I only have one. so
No
speak,
public
that's all we got.
comment at this time.
Okay, very good. All right, so no comment. So what I think makes more sense with the committee's approval is to maybe shift the order here. So we have an item 3 is estimated to take 5 minutes. And so rather than exhausting the staff for the next hour and a half on item 2 and then trying to squeeze in 3, maybe we'll reverse the order. Glenn, does that make sense? All right.
And we have Mia here, so she
Okay,
can jump
very
right
good,
on.
Mia. So you're on up. We'll just go ahead and take item 3 first. Welcome.
Got it. Good afternoon, directors. My name is Mia Lopez, and I'm on the communications team and also the task lead for our annual Race Equity Action Plan Tour. I'm here today to provide a recap on the tour that took place on Thursday, March 21st, before the board meeting in the city of Woodland, and to get your feedback on the experience to help us continue to build on the effort in the future years. As a refresher, this is the second tour of this type we've organized as part of the REAP, adopted by the board in 2022. Our goal with these tours is to go to different cities and counties, learn more about how race, equity, income, and geography affect social outcomes of communities throughout the Sacramento region. To do this, we collaborate with city and county staff and community-based organizations that are focused on efforts to improve safety, mobility, and livability for community members. This year, we had the opportunity to collaborate with the City of Woodland, Yolo County, and nonprofits working in these areas. We went to the AgStar office, which is a nonprofit focused on providing lab space and economic opportunities for food, ag. Excuse me.
Wait, sorry, we're. Okay, go ahead. Does anyone have the committee meeting?
Let's try one more time. Let me try one more time.
There you go.
Okay, awesome. Sorry about that. Just to go back one. So we went to the AgStar office, nonprofit located on the main street of Woodland, and we were learning about how this organization is providing lab space for health startups and ag startups in the region and connecting them to resources across the country. We also saw the Yolano Donnelly Housing Project. It is a 32-acre site, and Yolo County Housing Authority showed us how they are going to be transforming this area while expanding a key infill area just north of the main street of Woodland. We also heard from Mary Kimball at the Center for Land-Based Learning. She shared insights into challenges facing farmers in the region and also gave us insight into their Farmers Academy and mobile farmers market. And Valley Vision shared about the SACOG crop strategy. Lastly, YOLO Transportation District, who generously provided our transportation for the day, provided insight into how they are connecting their rural and diverse communities throughout the county to create their YOLO Active Transportation Corridors plan. So, as you can hear, lots and lots of conversation, lots of information in a short amount of time. And I'm happy to say we received a lot of positive feedback from attendees. We did hear some feedback about wanting to connect an even stronger relation in the content to our racial equity. And there was some feedback about liking to seeing the different and diverse economic engines and how much food and ag is going on in our region. I'm happy to report we also saw an increase in the number of board members who attended this tour compared to last year. We had 20 board members attend, whereas last year we had 10 board members attend. So it was really great to see all of the engagement, and including some of you all here today on the bus. Thank you for attending. Our goal is to continue collaborating on these tours with CBOs in other communities and to continue growing our participation from board members and to host a tour in every county. So we have 4 remaining. I'd like to open up the conversation and see if anyone has any feedback to share. We'd love to hear about some insights you gained from the presentations. Is there anything you came away with that you'd like to learn more about? And anything you'd like to see for tours like this one in the future? So thank you, and I will open up to see if you have any feedback or questions.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for that. Are there any comments or questions, suggestions by those that attended, or any questions by those that did not? I'll lead off just to say it was nice to sort of relax and be a tourist in my own backyard. And I actually learned a lot. Thank you. I thought staff did a great job of really kind of laying out sort of the distinct aspects of what kind of pulls it all together for us. And it was very informative. I was shocked that we were able to get through it all. I thought for sure we were going to be at least 2 hours delayed in the meeting, but I think it actually worked out well. So I thought staff did a great job of laying out the day for us. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just will reiterate that staff did a wonderful job in choosing the places that we went. We hit a lot of different aspects of what we were trying to show. Also, I learned a lot in that the lab thing that was there that we went through. That was wonderful. And one thing that was quite impressive is how do you become a farmer? People think about it and you automatically get that mental block in front of you because you don't know where to start. But they have a one-stop shop right there from start to finish for folks who might not otherwise be able to do that. And I think that's great. So thank you for including that.
Thank you. Great feedback.
Right. Thank you so much, Mia.
Thank
There are
you.
no other comments or questions? Appreciate it. Right. That takes us to item 2 is the 2025
The
blueprint
record
discussion.
shared, there's no public comment on that item.
Oh, there is a public discussion.
There's no public comment, just
There
wanted
is
to say
none.
for the record, I
Very good.
apologize. for
All right.
interrupting. Then we may want to go to the consent calendar, so, in case we lose a quorum.
Very good. You know what? I jumped right over that. Very good. Thank you, Robert, for that reminder. All right. So back up to item 1, the consent calendar is the approval of the minutes of the March 7th meeting. Is there a motion to approve? So move Frost with a
I'll second
second.
it.
Second Bullon. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. So it takes care of the consent. Now we go back to item 2.
Sorry, no public comment for the consent calendar too.
Man, you are on it, Robert. Thank you. You are keeping me honest. Thank you for that, Robert. Okay, very good. But I do know there's comment for the next item, so I'm ahead of you on that one. All right, so the next item, item 2, is the 2025 blueprint discussion scenario. And I think, Clint, are you leading that out?
Have Dob lead it out and then I will close it up.
Very good. Okay, welcome. I don't think it's on.
There we go. All right. Thank you for the opportunity here to present you all with an update on the 2025 blueprint. For this presentation, Clint and I are going to be focusing on the development and the performance of a single set of land use and transportation assumptions for the plan, which we're going to be referring to as the discussion scenario today. So I'll start by discussing some background, the process and engagement undertaken by staff over the last couple of years. where we landed on the discussion scenario and how we got there. And then I'll hand it over to Clint to talk about how the discussion scenario actually performs across the triple bottom line, as well as on the GHG reduction target. Finally, the committee will be presented with potential additional options for revisions to the land use assumptions as we move towards a board adoption of a land use scenario in June. So what is the 2025 blueprint? We've heard a lot about it at this committee. It's one of our primary functions as a regional government. It outlines recommendations for land use and transportation investment strategies for the SACOG region for the next 20 to 30 years. It's shaped by the triple bottom line. And it includes what's called a sustainable community strategy, or an SCS, which is demonstrating how the region could achieve the state mandated greenhouse gas reduction target through integrated land use and transportation planning. If we cannot demonstrate a path towards actually achieving that target, we are at risk of losing eligibility for key competitive grant opportunities at the state level, which are summarized in attachment C. In fact, since 2018, the SACOG region has received over $500 million in transportation funding from these state competitive grant programs requiring an adopted SCS. So over $500 million in funding for important projects are at stake as part of this plan. And James, I think you had mentioned you wanted to provide some high-level reminders here before we dive in.
Yeah, thanks, Dob. Just in talking to many of you and many stakeholders over the last couple of months, it's very clear to me that just at a very high level, it's important to reemphasize what this plan is and what it does and what it doesn't do. And I was just at the North State BIA yesterday, which was an excellent set of questions and some engagement. So our plan, as you'll see again, calls for a lot of growth in this region, 600,000 more people, which require 278,000 housing units. On average, that's about 9,000 units a year. That's a lot. That is more than we have been able to produce in the last 10 years. So it is calling for a lot of growth in housing production. It is calling, the discussion scenario that you'll hear today is also calling for a balanced approach to that growth. You had the pathways last year. We talked about those are crash test dummies. We throw those out. This is a discussion scenario that has about 1/3 of the growth, the discussion scenario in developing communities, and 2/3 in what we call established communities. That 1/3 in developing communities or greenfield communities is actually higher than what we've been doing the last 5 or 10 years. So it's got a lot of growth, and it's a balanced approach with a little less than 1/3 in developing communities. This discussion scenario is consistent with your general plans. So all of you have general plans, every city and county. There's nothing that's inconsistent in our discussion scenario with those general plans. It really is implementing your general plans. I know there's been a lot of questions and some concerns. Hey, if my project is not in the blueprint, the final adopted blueprint, will it move forward? And the answer is yes. You can still move forward even if you're not in there's a lot of greenfield developments right now, mostly developing communities, that are not in our current plan that you adopted in 2020. Those don't sit and stay, they continue to move. So there's nothing that holds those up. And then finally, and we have said this in every adopted plan that the board's adopted ever since 2012, there is nothing in this discussion scenario, the final plan, that takes away local land use authority. So we've actually said that and spelled that out, right? You all are decision makers at SACOG to adopt a regional plan. You all, as you sit on your city councils and board of supervisors, are the local land use authority, and you maintain that ultimate land use authority. So I don't know if that's like the nutrition label on the back of the food that I just wanted to read to you, but I think those are important reminders as we get into this discussion today. And remember, this is an information item, so we're looking for your feedback and engagement. It'll come to the board as well in a couple of weeks. So back to you.
All right, thanks.
James, I have a
Yeah.
real quick question. This was hard for me to wrap my head around when I first got on this board, but just real briefly, and I don't mean to take this in a different direction of
I'm
what
sorry,
we're
Rich,
trying-
I'm
the
not
information
sure,
we're
Rich, the microphone's not picking you up, sorry.
Try it. Try it up.
Okay,
There we
is that better?
Yes.
How about now?
Just okay.
Okay. So I don't mean to hijack and change the direction of what we're talking about today, but when you say that those projects that are not in the plan
Mhm.
can still move forward, at the risk of, why are we doing this plan? And I know why we're doing it, but what are the downsides of a project that's not in the plan? Is there a financial difference or what does that look like, I guess?
Generally speaking, no. I know there's been a couple of specific projects that have raised concerns, hey, we can't get a particular grant. And I would encourage everybody, all stakeholders, if that's the case, please talk to us. So there may be some exceptions, you know, and maybe I'll hold off from naming specific projects, but again, remember, there were more projects in your last plan cycle that were not in the plan than were in the plan. I'm just talking about developing communities. None of those have stopped in their tracks. They didn't just pack up in 2020 and stop work. They keep moving. I know, and we understand, it's a really important thing in some ways to be in a sustainable community strategy, right? Because you're part of a plan that achieves goals, environmental goals and climate goals. So there's definitely a benefit to being in. Think of this as a strategic plan. I will tell you too, we're talking housing and jobs right now. We're going to talk transportation in the next few months. There are more projects than we have funding for. So just like housing and jobs, you're going to have to have a strategic constrained approach to growth, even though it's really high at 278,000 housing units. You'll also have to make some decisions on transportation. That's the job of this plan, and you all as a board is to make those decisions on sort of a strategy, if you will, and financially constrained plan.
Can I add really briefly on just your kind of last part of your question? It's like, why would you do this plan if it doesn't actually mean anything in terms of the authority, right? The way SB 375 was designed to work was not to take away or limit local control of land use, but to incentivize growth that is lower VMT, integrated land use and transportation. So what the plan offers to the projects that kind of land in it is some of those projects, depending on their context and what they're doing, have options to streamline their environmental review using our plan to tier off of. That typically doesn't happen in the developing communities. It's more focused on kind of your TOD type, your transit-oriented projects, your infill-oriented projects. Our region uses those, not a lot, but uses those streamlining provisions in SB 375, I believe more than any other region in the state. And so part of the plan, it's not a command and control type plan. It is an incentivized type of plan where you'd have a smoother path through your environmental review if you're consistent with the plan. So that's where the power of the plan comes in, and part of the reason we do it.
Great, and that's all very important background to all of this. So this is our schedule slide. Where are we headed? We're using what we learned from the Pathways effort and working towards a single set of land use and transportation assumptions for what will eventually become what we're calling the final scenario. So you're hearing today about the discussion scenario, which will be honed further by feedback over the next couple of months. Then the board will be asked to adopt a land use scenario in June, which would allow us to kind of continue that transportation conversation over summer and fall. And then the board would then be asked to adopt a final scenario in October and November, which would solidify the land use and the transportation assumptions together. So that was the schedule at kind of the 50,000 foot level. I'm going to zoom in a bit on the road to this discussion scenario that's before you. This discussion scenario is the result of years of work on the blueprint by the SACOG board, by SACOG staff, and in collaboration with local government planners. We went into a lot of detail in the staff report to try to document all of that engagement, in particular on the land use assumptions. This is just kind of a high level summary of that engagement, starting first with the board's adoption of the triple bottom line policy framework, which was back in 2022. It's included in attachment B in your packet as a reminder, but this framework has shaped the analysis, the board discussions, public and stakeholder engagement, the development of the plan. And that framework makes a commitment to come together around a collective vision to advance economic prosperity, to support environmental health and resiliency, and promote equity through reducing transportation and housing disparities across the region. The board then took another very important action also in 2022 to adopt the regional growth forecast, which includes 600,000 new people, 263,000 new jobs, and 278,000 new homes between 2020 and 2050. As James was alluding to, this is not a conservative growth forecast. This is an ambitious one. So this on the screen, you can kind of see the bars are housing permit completions over the last 12 years or so. James mentioned the 9,000 figure. That's an average across the whole period. If you kind of split that up into kind of the first part of the period between 2020 and 2035, that growth is quite robust. It's over 10,000 units. We actually haven't achieved that growth in any of the years, even in kind of the banner 2022 year. We do have that growth kind of leveling off a little bit in the 2035 to 50 period. That is really reflecting demographic trends that are present in our region, but also in the state and the rest of the nation. So getting back to this, SACOG has conducted a call for transportation project nominations and a series of local agency kickoff meetings with local planning staff, Department of Transportation, Public Works staff. That was in late 2021 into spring of 2022. That kind of gave us an understanding of the universe of transportation projects that are out there, what was happening with kind of these key development projects, what some of the local policy priorities are for each of our member agencies. We then set out to create a parcel level, what we call base year, which was basically everything that exists on the ground on every single parcel as of January of 2020 in terms of units and jobs. We also created a build out inventory, which is what is allowed to be built according to local general plans, specific plans, and kind of these new plans that are in process. We have a pipeline inventory of projects that are under construction or about to break ground. All that work was first reviewed and vetted by your local staff in the early part of 2022. Once we had a really good sense of the land use and the transportation universe of possibilities, between April 2022 and March of 2023, SACOG worked with jurisdiction staff, the board, to develop, revise, and evaluate 3 potential regional growth scenarios looking out to 2050. We called these pathways. They were all kind of within the guardrails of what was locally planned, but they charted very different land use futures. And that brings us to where we are today, where the board will take all of those learnings from the pathways and narrow in on a single set of assumptions. The discussion scenario is the result of a very iterative process. I know this is the first time that the board or the committees are kind of seeing this, but this is about 6 months of iterative process between your staff and SACOG staff. In August of last year, we held a local planner workshop to kind of dive into what we learned from pathways, what some of those key considerations were as SACOG develops a single set of land use and transportation assumptions for the plan. We actually sent out a draft version of this discussion scenario in kind of spreadsheet form to all of your local staff for a 6-week review period from September to October. During that period, local staff were asked to provide comments related to things like pipeline projects and key public investments related to new growth areas. What are potential barriers to realizing the assumptions, infrastructure phasing, questions like that. And during that period, we received a ton of feedback. We had really good attendance at some countywide office hours. We held individual jurisdiction meetings. We had meetings with developers of large projects. We got formal comment letters from local staff. We got informal emails. All of that has helped shape the April 2024 discussion scenario that is before you. So what do those land use assumptions actually look like? I don't want to bury the lead. We are very proud that we believe we've put together a single set of assumptions that, paired with some identified policies, will put us in striking distance to actually achieving our ambitious greenhouse gas target. Clint's going to get a lot more into that later, but I just want to give a high-level overview of where we landed and the approach to actually getting to the assumptions that we did. The discussion scenario land use assumptions, as are all of our land use assumptions, are organized and summarized by our community types, which you can see on the screen here. They're summarized in attachment D. Those community types start with centers and corridors, which are your downtowns, transit station areas, your commercial corridors, your rural main streets. These are areas that have tremendous potential as growth engines for our region and are identified in your local plans as places that we really want to see growth. Next are established communities, which kind of fill the gaps in between those centers and corridors. They tend to be a little bit more suburban in nature, but are still proximate to a lot of destinations. In the staff report and in this presentation, we're going to provide some stats on how much growth is occurring in the combined area between centers and corridors and established communities. That makes up the vast majority of the existing footprint of our region. It's where 90% of regional residents live today. And those areas include, definitely the kind of urban areas that you would expect, but they also include a lot of really suburban areas like those on the screen. So this is not just your kind of historic Folsom downtown Sac and that type of situation. It's really a large area that includes the whole footprint. Developing and potential developing communities are new growth areas that are more on the edges of the existing urban footprint that would expand our regional footprint outward. So some of these have already started construction. Some of them started construction 10 years ago, but they're kind of early in the absorption. They're less than 50% in terms of build out, and they're a little bit further away from kind of a lot of destinations. Some of them have not actually started construction yet and are a little bit further away from getting started. You then have the rural residential communities, which are kind of more of your farm home, large, 1 acre lot type of thing. And then of course our agricultural and natural lands. So this is a key spreadsheet. This is attachment A that's in your packets. And this is the detailed land use assumptions for the discussion scenario. It summarizes the assumptions in each jurisdiction and each community type into base year build out, 2020 to 2035 growth, and 2020 to 2050 growth. We also included an interactive map to show how each of those rows in the spreadsheet actually correspond to a geographic area. It's completely interactive. It's actually quite fun to play around with if you like messing with maps like me. So very much recommend taking a look. You can kind of toggle to the jurisdiction, to the whole county, regional community type, individual plan area. And when you toggle, all the assumptions on the right automatically update, including historical permitting data, as well as some spatial distribution splits. Speaking of those splits, so this is showing the spatial distribution of housing. You're going to see this slide a few times in this presentation. It's the percent of new housing that is happening in combined centers and corridors and established communities. As you recall from Pathways, we explored 3 very different futures, ranging from less than half of housing growth occurring in these centers and corridors and established communities in Pathway 1, all the way up to 88% in Pathway 3. The discussion scenario is slightly more compact than Pathway 2, with about 68% of housing happening in these areas. This essentially matches the proportion of completed housing units that have been built in the 2018 to 2022 period, which is the most recent period that we have housing data for, which came in about 67%. On the job side, the pathways range from 76% to 89% of new jobs occurring in these centers and corridors and established communities. If you look at where jobs increased between 2016 and 2020, which is on the job side, which is a little bit more of a difficult data point to achieve, so that's the most recent trend data that we have, you actually get higher than Pathway 3 on recent trends with almost 90%. The discussion scenario falls between Pathway 1 and Pathway 2 with 81% of new jobs in these areas. And we'll discuss a little bit later why. I know we're talking a lot about the centers and corridors and established communities, but it's really important to say that we are by no means assuming low growth in our developing communities. James mentioned this, but this is very much a balanced approach. In fact, if you look at the discussion scenario 2020 to 2035, annualized housing and job growth in these developing communities, it's significantly higher than what we've actually seen on a yearly basis in our most recent trends. So the discussion scenario is actually quite ambitious about growth in developing communities when you compare it to what we've actually seen in recent history. The challenge that we have on developing communities, and actually in all of our community types, but I think just a lot of the attention falls on these developing communities, is that there's orders of magnitude more remaining capacity in local plans than we can actually assume by the horizon year of our plan. So when you add up all of the proposed housing in all of the developing and potential developing communities, there's room for over 400,000 new units. Remember that SACOG's entire regional growth forecast is for the whole region, 278,000 homes for the blueprint. The 2020 to 2050 discussion scenario assumes 86,000 homes occur in the developing and potential developing communities. So mathematically, there's just significantly more units that are planned in these areas than will be in the blueprint. So what was the approach for actually kind of getting to those assumptions that I just walked through in the discussion scenario? This slide is, again, explored in much more detail in your staff reports, but there were 4 key inputs that we want to talk through that help shape these assumptions. First and foremost, we wanted to do something and put something in front of you that we think can achieve the greenhouse gas target and ensure that this region remains eligible for key state transportation funding. The board also eventually needs to adopt a plan that is feasible to implement and reasonable. So that was a necessary condition that staff embedded into this scenario. In fact, feasibility is something that we need to demonstrate as a part of SES compliance to the Air Resources Board. The assumptions are also optimizing for the triple bottom line policy goals that you adopted. So we're solving for performance metrics that are associated with equity, environment, and economy. And then the assumptions are also incorporating local feedback. The vast majority of feedback that we received were for minor shifts to kind of bring assumptions more in line with recent development trends, to kind of provide updates on some of these key pipeline projects, some of these policy changes that are, in flux and changing month to month, infrastructure investments that have gone in that would influence this. SACOG made adjustments to the assumptions to reflect these comments. There were a couple of more significant requests for shifts that would have jeopardized the ability to achieve the target that we did not entirely reflect in the April discussion scenario before you. So digging in a little bit on the necessary condition that we have there to achieve the GHG target. So this is a VMT map. This is from the discussion scenario, 2035 VMT in the future. It looks probably very similar to the outputs of our model and the pathways that you've already seen. VMT is lowest in places with lots of destinations. So when you're driving, the trips are relatively short. And, in some of these best performing locations, you don't need a car for all of your trips. This is the 2035 discussion scenario VMT by our community types. It's relative to 2020. We see our best VMT performance, of course, in centers and corridors, followed by established communities coming in just under regional average. Then above average for developing communities that are kind of already under construction in the light purple there, followed by higher VMT in developing communities that are not under construction yet today. We really tried to craft the discussion scenario in a way that balances growth across the community types, recognizing that we are going to have growth in developing communities, but that growth is really balanced with robust growth in centers and corridors and established communities. So as James mentioned, this is going to require removing barriers and kind of to seeing some of that growth in the places that are below the red dotted line. It's also going to mean doing what we can to reduce VMT in developing communities by ensuring that that growth is efficient, that it's complete, and that it doesn't require a car for every trip. This is the same slide from before, but it's worth highlighting here. This is the most meaningful tool that we have for achieving our target, and it's robust housing growth in our centers and corridors and established communities. We know from Pathways modeling that we will not be able to achieve the target with a growth pattern that resembles Pathway 1. And in fact, what we found is that it was going to be a huge challenge actually with the growth pattern even in Pathway 2. The discussion scenario seeks to actually improve upon the amount of housing in these lower VMT areas relative to Pathway 2. So it inches up that green bar above Pathway 2, brings it more in line with recent trends in the last 5 years. On the job side, the discussion scenario includes less job growth in centers and corridors and established communities than Pathway 2, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but what that means is more jobs in developing communities. So this is an economic prosperity play, of course, but it's also a VMT and a GHG play because it allows developing communities to become less of a bedroom community and more of a complete community with a mix of housing, jobs, services, and destinations. And there's actually some early signs of movement supporting this idea with emerging job centers like the medical campus in Folsom south of 50, You have Sutter Point, the Woodland Research and Technology Park, the livable employment area in Elk Grove, the Placer One Sacramento State campus in unincorporated Placer County. These are places where the discussion scenario is leaning into job growth as a means of improving VMT performance in these developing communities.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? I
Please.
just want to thank you for incorporating this concept because this is a drum I was banging on 4 years ago, that we need to move the jobs to the people, not always the people to the jobs. Thank you.
Absolutely. So the second necessary condition that we had for the discussion scenario development was to ensure that the assumptions remain feasible so you can adopt a plan that can be implemented. And this is one that we take very seriously because, as I mentioned, we of course want to reflect on the ground realities, but we also are required to by the state and federal government. So we remain feasible in a few different ways. The first is that everything in the discussion scenario is consistent with and implementing your local plans. This is something that James was highlighting, but it's really important. This is not a requirement, right? In fact, regions frequently will explore growth patterns that depart from local plans that are, not SACOG, outside of our region, but we keep everything down to the parcel level in line with what is planned locally. And we do that by creating a regional build-out inventory that takes the thousands of local designations in your general plan, specific plans, master plans, and consolidates them into regional place types based on what kind of density they actually allow. So you can kind of see that tapestry on the screen here. We also painstakingly create a pipeline project inventory for all projects that have been built since 2020, are under construction today, or are going through kind of an advanced entitlement process like a tentative map. As you can imagine, this is a bit of a moving target for 28 jurisdictions to track, but we spend a lot of time making sure that our assumptions are reflecting these projects that are moving forward, and we vet all of that with your local staff. We also look at recent permitting trends, not just regionally, but at the community type level to get a sense of how quickly different areas are growing. So this is provided in your packets in attachment E. Don't worry about squinting. It's all based off of permitting data on your local, that your local staff actually provide the state in what are called your housing element annual progress reports. So our assumptions are not a straight line extrapolation for each individual area. Conditions do change, places build out, but this is an important data point for us to kind of look at it as we try to remain reasonable. And then I mentioned regionally, right? We look at where those completed permits happen at the regional level in terms of how much growth is occurring in each of these different community types. And as we mentioned, the discussion scenario is actually in line with the regional share of housing that's happening in these centers and corridors and established communities. And then this is maybe a little bit more important on the developing community side, but we also look at readiness factors for some of our developing communities to think through how likely is this project to happen based off of kind of the regulatory and market factors that you see on the slide. And I know this is also pretty small, but it's provided in attachment F. So, we're looking at questions like, is the specific plan approved? Does it require annexation? Are there litigation issues? Is it proximate to jobs and destinations? Does it require, major transportation projects that aren't yet funded? These are all questions that influence this kind of readiness factor that we consider to ensure that we are remaining reasonable. I think I'm going to hand it over to Clint here to talk about how the discussion scenario actually performs across the triple bottom line and the greenhouse gas reduction target. Do you want the? Okay.
Thanks. So Dov mentioned that this discussion scenario, it's really nested in this triple bottom line framework that the board adopted a couple of years ago. And we're focused a lot on greenhouse gas, and I'm going to dive deeper into greenhouse gas, but there's a lot that we look at, and this is just a smattering of what we look at as we're developing this. And so all of these indicators you see here have some tie back into that triple bottom line. So one of the statements in the triple bottom line is improving access for people from homes to jobs, from homes to opportunity, giving them options other than driving alone, or if they do drive, shorter distances to get to where they need to go. And so you'll see here kind of what you see today, and then in this discussion scenario, we're seeing an increase of doubling the number of I can't see the hopefully that's visible to folks, but roughly a doubling of the number of homes in the region that are near higher frequency transit, um, number of jobs that are within a 30-minute drive of a worker's home or a 30-minute transit trip are both going up pretty substantially. On the access to jobs via transit, that's a very big increase, about 354% increase in our environmental justice areas. You see the environmental justice areas throughout this table, so you can kind of see a difference between where we are improving access in those areas as compared to kind of access improvements across the whole region. On health, that's another, this is just one metric on the health front. Air quality is a huge metric on the health front, and we're still a little ways away from doing our modeling on air quality. But a little bit of an increase in just the amount of time that people might spend in active transportation for transportation purposes. Obviously, you know, where you have trails and things like that and people are recreating, that's not included here. Household VMT per capita, we see going down. That's what really drives the greenhouse gas reductions that were required. That's a per capita target. And then you do see a slight increase in congestion, but note here, that's roughly what this is saying is about 5.5% of all of the driving that happens in the region today happens in congested conditions. With the addition of 600,000 people to the region, we're seeing roughly a 1% increase in that. So yes, congestion goes up, but it's not going up tremendously at a regional scale. One of the things we look at as we're kind of looking at the transportation investments and marrying those up to a land use pattern is where do we see bottlenecks happening, right? It's one thing to look at regional congestion, the congestion that happens across all travel in the region, but where do we see bottlenecks, either existing today or starting to pop up as these growth patterns emerge over time? And then we make sure that we match a transportation investment. Sometimes that's a lane widening, sometimes it's an operational improvement. At times, if it's along a good corridor for transit, it's a transit investment, or it's a combination of all of those things. Typically, it's going to take all of those things for some of the bigger bottlenecks. So this is some of the indicators. We'll bring you a lot more of these as we start digging more into the transportation side of the plan. But I want to jump into the greenhouse gas target and where we are landing as of right now. So where we are right now, as far as the discussion scenarios, it gets us to just under that 18% mark. So about within 1% of the 19% greenhouse gas target. There are programs that we've been looking at, some of them that the board has suggested, that I think gets us the rest of the way there. We have not yet included pricing, mileage-based pricing strategies in this discussion scenario. That's a conversation we want to have with the board. Is it likely that the state can move to a mileage-based pricing system away from the fuel tax in time for a 2035 target? If that was to happen, that gives us some ability to use that as a management tool in our region. And that could help us get to that additional 1%. But while that is primarily, it's a revenue solution. It's a way to make up for all of the loss of transportation funding that will happen as we move over to a non-combustion fleet. That could happen later in the plan. It doesn't necessarily have to happen by 2035 because we also have some other strategies. School bus recovery program was one that came up at the board. It shows a lot of potential to help us. It wouldn't get us all the way over the hump, but it's a really good program for us to look into a bit more. We're already baked into the discussion scenario. We're already seeing a much higher baseline of telework. Roughly 25% of workers is what we're assuming in the long term are going to stay in that telework space, full-time telework space. However, we've had in our past transportation demand management programs, telework policies, support programs. Maybe we could get a little bit more out of that. We could go above what we're kind of seeing as the general trend, and that could help us. Reducing transit fares. There's a potentially hefty price tag to that, but if we're looking at local option sales taxes in the region, are there ways that we could use some of that to lower or reduce fares either for everyone or for certain parts of the demographic? These are all things that could get us the rest of the way there. But focusing on the stuff that we've already kind of baked into this discussion scenario, this top bar, land use and transportation, that's the most powerful tool we have. That's the land use pattern and then serving that with an efficient transportation system. That gets us about 14.5% of the way there. That is what includes that 68% growth in the existing footprint that Dov mentioned. It's around 600 lane miles of strategic road and highway expansions, including some additional managed lanes. And then it's roughly doubling the amount of weekday transit service that we have out on the streets. The combination of those things, there might be a little bit, this number is subject to move up and down as we kind of refine our transportation network. We have the discussion scenario, that very long attachments, over 100 pages of all the transportation projects and what's in the plan and what's out of the plan. That is out with your agency, your local staff for review right now. I think they have until the first week of May or so. And we're going to be meeting with them individually on that up until then. That is absolutely going to result in some refinements and some changes to the transportation list that underlies all this. So these numbers are going to change. But where we're at right now, we're pretty confident that we'll be able to stay close to this, even as we refine the transportation side of things, is this 17.95%. ITS and system management, those are things like priority queue jumps for transit. It's things like 511 rideshare, car sharing, things like that. Our TDM and car sharing, those are like guaranteed ride home. It's your TMAs, it's bike month. It's all of those things that are kind of your programs to encourage thinking about driving a little bit differently. And then there's your local electric vehicle and infrastructure incentive program. So while the state primarily built into the state's climate plan is a transition to electric vehicles, our target is on top of what the state already thinks it's going to achieve through electric vehicles. But if we demonstrate that we've got local momentum, local programs that accelerate EV deployment faster than what the state's plans are, that is something that we've also been able to take credit for in previous plans. And we've got that here in this local electric vehicle infrastructure incentive programs. And then last, bike and scooter share, micromobility sharing programs. We've got the one already, but those are also another area we've been able to bring to the state and include in previous plans as a way that we make up a little bit of this. These are very precise looking numbers. It's because all of these have a kind of a robust methodology and calculation that we have to work out with the Air Resources Board to take credit for them. So these aren't just thrown up on a map. These are all results of either modeling or some calculators that we build with the state. So, so this scenario is getting us to within striking distance. We think with those additional strategies off to the right that we are within striking distance, that we can get there, get over the hump. But we've had a lot of questions. James talked about this a little bit earlier. So did Dov. We've had a lot of questions just about, in particular, the growth pattern that we have around developing communities in the plan. So we wanted to make sure we brought you some options that we could bring back to you in May ahead of, ideally, we are asking you to take an action on a final set of land use assumptions in June. So those additional options are obviously the discussion scenario that we're bringing you today. We can continue to refine that. This can even serve as a backstop. If you do decide to go with or want us to bring you some more information on one of the other options I'll talk about here in a minute, we still have the discussion scenario. If we go back and do that work and it's either it's not what you're hoping, it doesn't result in what you're wanting it to result in, we always have the discussion scenario to fall back on. The first option, or option 2, that we could work up to bring back to you in May would be prioritize performance in the developing communities. So all of the developing communities right now are going to have, depending on where they're at in the region and the context, the built environment around them, have different levels of per capita VMT that they would generate. So what we could do is kind of re-look at how we have allocated the growth across developing communities in the region. That is not, what we did was not solely based on performance. It was based on a whole series of factors that Dov went through, including, local approvals, how far along are they grading, have they started with backbone infrastructure. We could de-emphasize some of those things and just focus more on performance and move some of the growth from those developing communities into the higher performing ones. Another option would be a challenge, a big challenge with the developing communities is at build out, many of them are very good performing or potentially very very good performing from a VMT standpoint, but it takes a long time to get to build out. And with only around 86,000 units happening in those areas and 400,000 units of capacity, we're going to have to pick some winners and losers if we wanted to show some that just make the path towards build out a little further by 2035 and then by 2050. So we could kind of do this consolidation exercise where we would have the same amount of growth in developing communities, but we would concentrate it in fewer of them so that they could start to see some of the VMT performance benefits that they get as they approach build out. So that would be one of the other options that we bring to you. So we wanted to, I think, pause here. I'm not going to go to next steps yet. Wanted to pause here and see if there are any comments, questions. I think I saw that one locked and loaded. Yeah, go for it.
So you've gone through this analysis, which is superb, right? And having the discussion scenario, I think is absolutely worthwhile. The question I have is, okay, so now you have cast yourself as a referee choosing projects that fit the discussion scenario or don't, or means of encouraging the ones that are more beneficial over the ones that are less beneficial to the scenario. How do you implement that? How do you actually do that on a regional basis? Tell communities what to approve and what to not approve if the only lever that you have officially is withholding transportation dollars. So how do you get buy-in into any of these scenarios, honestly,
Can I
just
ask a
in
clarifying
terms of
question, Rick?
policy?
Are you talking about for the discussion scenario or for the other options, say the third?
I think the
third
question
option?
stands regardless of which scenario you choose. If you are trying to manifest a future, you have to do that through public policy, right? But the public policy is actually controlled by all the member agencies, not by SACOG. So you can give advice, you can have that reflected in the RENA allocations probably. You can have that reflected in the funding choices that are made for federal and state funding that gets distributed through SACOG. Outside of that, is there some other policy mechanism that you feel is going to be supportive of whatever scenario we choose?
Just a great question. And as a reminder, I mean, this is not the first plan cycle that you all have asked questions around infill development, for example, right? And the last plan that we did, this very similar kind of question was asked. How do we actually make that real?
Right.
Because SACOG can't wave a magic wand, right? And that's where Green Means Go came from. The idea was to get all the cities and counties engaged to, support Green Means Go, adopt green zones, go to the state, go to the feds, right? I think what you're suggesting would require something similar.
I think that's true. I think that the thing that stimulated my question is the idea that, and this kind of came up because of some language that was suggested, and also just from practical purposes, my comment about bringing the jobs to the people. It's in our interest potentially to be very encouraging of certain developments so that it goes from incubating, or not incubating, but start to finish at a more rapid pace. But in order to do that, you have to have the means of, incentivizing that and maybe disincentivizing moving slowly. So if we're going to try and benefit from that, where we go from, just crudely from a greenfield to a community that is, complete, what do you think are the policy tools to implement that? And that could be a question that goes to somebody in the audience also, but I just,
Well, I think it is an important question, actually, that it's like the next phase of what you'll all have to come to, because whatever you decide on for your discussion scenario, right, the land use and transportation projects, and even the strategies that Clint was walking through, you'll have to also then identify what are the policies to include in the plan and the programs that are going to support the implementation of that. And so you already have a certain number of developing communities in your adopted MTPSCS, right? And there are transportation projects that go along with those in there. And so you design your funding programs, right? That, you grant out funding and, there are federal and state competitive grant programs
Mhm.
that your staff work on to identify the funding to help cobble, together to build those out. So there are all those levers in place right now
Right.
that you will, you all get to vote on what ultimately you want to do with each of those implementation programs. And then the other question is, well, what else could there be that we could do in addition to those current levers? And that's a conversation that we hope that you
So
will
we're-
have.
So we're not there yet. Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing some, underlying policy decision that had to be made in order to implement this plan as described.
You're not missing it, but I actually think it's really important what you've called out, because no matter what you adopt in your discussion scenario, you will have to also then adopt policies and strategies to implement it. That has to go into the plan. That's all part of it. So I'm glad you raised it.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Well, hold on. I just want to make sure. So in terms of staff's presentation, are you pausing because you want questions on this specific? I just want to make sure we take public testimony before we get too far into the board or the director's deliberations.
The
So-
only thing I have left on the presentation side is next steps. And so I was going to pause so we could talk options, and then we'll talk next steps. Because some of the next steps will depend on whether we're moving forward with what options.
All right, very good.
That's all I've got. Just 2 slides after this.
Okay, well, you know what, then why don't you go ahead and push through the next 2 slides so that we can take public testimony, because then I suspect once we start our deliberations, it'll evolve, so.
Well, he wants
Do
to.
you want to jump in, Patrick, or? All right, so we'll keep going and then we'll start with Patrick. So go ahead and finish up and then we'll.
Jump it. There we go. So we are in, where are we? We're in April right now, bringing you your first view of the discussion scenario. Depending on what your direction is today, the plan would be to come back to you in May with one of these additional options, potentially both of these additional options, in more of kind of a spreadsheet, similar to the spreadsheet that you've seen that kind of shows all the allocation. We can bring that to you in May. We can do some sketch level analysis on how that might perform compared to what we're showing you today. Bring that for kind of further discussion, direction, board input, reaction in May. We'd still hope to be on schedule based on your direction there to adopt land use assumptions in June. It's possible that we could bring you kind of a menu in June and you would choose which one you want us to proceed with. Then the idea would be between June and the fall, October, November timeframe is when we're really digging in more on the transportation side. I mentioned we have the transportation list that goes along with this discussion scenario out for local agency review through the end of this month into May. And then we would want to come back, work on modeling all of that, bring that to you in June, refine those, have more time to refine those transportation network based on board input between June and September so that we can bring you a final full package, your land use assumptions and your transportation package in October, November for adoption. That would set us off to the races on writing an EIR, writing the plan document, and then as we were just talking about, having all of the conversations around plan implementation policies and strategies. And in those policies and strategies, one of the requirements we have is, to your point, is that has to identify what SACOG as a regional entity can do, but what would also be needed by the state, by local agencies to implement this. We would hope to have plan written, the EIR written and ready to circulate for draft by May of next year. That's roughly a 6-month period to write this EIR. That gives us roughly the required 2 months we need for public input comment period, roughly a month and a half to respond to comments in case we get a lot of comments. We'd want to reserve some time for that. Then bring you a draft plan, final adoption at the end of next calendar year. So that's the schedule we're on. So if we were, part of the challenge we have right now is we can absolutely do these options. If those options turn into more iteration, that can start to erode our ability to get this plan, kind of your adoption of the transportation network and the land use assumptions done by the end of the year. that has a ripple effect on our ability to adopt a plan by the end of the calendar year, which is what we're required to do in state statute. So those are the next steps.
Okay.
That's all I've got here.
All right, very good. Okay. So, so with that, then staff's finished with the presentation. We'll go ahead and take some public testimony, and then we'll return it back to the, okay, to my colleagues. So with that, Mr. Dogosi, join us. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a very narrow request. I have distributed to some of you, and I've given to the clerk copies for the rest of you of some language that I am here to urge you to adopt as part of this discussion scenario. Before I get into the language, I do want to bring to your attention the confusion that comes from labeling this as the 2025 blueprint. Every time you say 2025 blueprint, you're going to have to explain, no, it's different than the 2004 blueprint. Now, I've had this discussion with James and staff, and they are very clear that it's not meant to confuse, but in fact it does. And I want to suggest a different, I don't know what it is, nomenclature or whatever, a different label for this work product that aligns with the SACOG's transportation charter. I think it ought to be called the 2025 roadmap, not the 2025 blueprint. I think it's important to keep that clarity between a document that has wide support dating from 2004 and 20 years of public activity. I think it's important to keep clarity between that and today's work product that you're looking at. So now, as to the language, I'm asking you to incorporate into the document. I don't know if have you passed the copies out to everybody? Everybody has them? Okay, what you'll see there in particular, Clint actually referenced it in talking about option 3, the possibility that new growth areas, because of the
1
manner
minute
in which
remaining. 1 minute remaining on public comment.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask for a little deference on this.
Well, yeah, let's just
All
keep
right,
it going.
thank you.
Yeah.
Anyway, what Clint referenced in his discussion on option 3 is reflected in the language that I have in front of you, that when you develop in a new growth area, the first 100 lots, the first 500 lots, your standards for VMT and GHG are going to be less than optimal. But when you get to a built-out condition compared to existing communities around the Sacramento region today, that fully developed community blows away the performance on existing communities. So I would caution you to be wary about punishing these new growth areas where you will far exceed the standards you're trying to achieve because of the interim condition that occurs between now and full build out. The language you have in front of you attempts to address that to the extent that it can be improved. I have no problem with, tweaking it. I would ask that you direct staff between now and your next, or the board meeting in late April, to confer with us and wordsmith this into an appropriate form. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, very good. All right, well, thank you very much. Yes, sir, jump right in.
So, Mr. Osi, just a question for you. Right out of the gate in the proposed language, it talks about where impacts are significant, all feasible mitigation measures to reduce VMT and GHG emissions will be imposed as a result of, CEQA analysis. I'm just wondering, in terms of the word feasible in that sentence, what do you think the metrics are that would be ones that you could kind of implement that would determine feasible versus infeasible, practical versus impractical, economic versus not economic?
So your comment about bringing jobs to the people is precisely in line with how do you reduce vehicle miles traveled?
Sure.
And as a result, how do you reduce greenhouse gases?
Mhm.
So, I mean, look, I grew up here. I know what's going on. I mean, I know about South Folsom. I know about West Roseville. I see what's happening out by the airport. Just for everybody's edification, Metro Air Park was designed as a 2,000-acre industrial complex, ultimately containing 20 million square feet of industrial space. Today, they have 5,284 jobs that are established there, and they're headed to 22,000 jobs in that location. Opposite Metro Air Park on the south side of the freeway, you have a company called North Point that has acquired 400 acres. It has a pending application at LAFCO for annexation to the city for another 6 million square feet. So when you ask me about the ability to address greenhouse gas and vehicle miles traveled, it's not about a specific subdivision or project. It's about the entire dynamic that's going on in a particular region or subregion. Those people who are working at Metro Air Park or on North Point's property ultimately will need housing. The closest location for their housing happens to be my property. So part of a dealing with greenhouse gases and vehicles miles traveled is to understand these connections and, as you say, bring jobs to housing.
Yeah, you and I have a deep agreement on that topic. I'm just curious if you're talking more discreetly about weighing a good project against a less good project, and you're trying to impose, mitigation measures on a project. What's the red line that you see where it's practical or impractical or feasible or not feasible? And is that metric, proximity to jobs? I mean, is that the principal?
I think
is that the
that
principal thing, or is there others?
I think proximity to jobs is a very important piece of the pie, but you've heard me say before that not all pieces of data are equally important.
Sure.
There are other pieces of data that are important. I thought the point that James made earlier, that in lieu of thinking about 9,000 units a year spread over 35 different potential growth areas, the market's very Darwinian. 35 or 30 different growth areas it's not going to happen. Right now in Sacramento region, you have two primary growth areas. You have south of Folsom, which is just exploding, and you have West Roseville. City of Sacramento is virtually built out. Orangevale's not having a housing boom. I mean, those are the two growth areas today, and it's very Darwinian. And when those two are doing well, everybody else tends to die on the vine.
All right, so what we're gonna need to do.
Thank you.
Because we left exactly 45 minutes left for the rest of us to deliberate, because some have some time sensitive issues. So thank you, Mr. Osi, for your testimony. Thank you, Director Kozlowski. I'm gonna go back to Director Kennedy to kick it off again.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Chair. First of all, let me say that the process is working because I think that this staff report shows that we are evolving in a better direction than we started, and I think that's what the intention was. So I want to really give Clinton, Dov, and whoever else was tag teaming this a lot of credit, and also for making putting together a document, at least the beginnings of the document that either you made it clearer or you took out big words I don't understand, but it's definitely clearer, and I appreciate that. A couple things, and one, Mr. Osi kind of stole a little bit of my thunder there, just because, and this won't come as a surprise, I've brought it up before. My concern, and Clint brought up option 3, my concern is that if we don't look at, and I'm coming at this from the County of Sacramento perspective, because we do have plans in the works and plans that have been approved that at build out are show much better than if we look at the phasing. And what I fear is that if we don't look at build out, and I've heard the arguments about looking at build out, it takes longer and we've got more product planned than we could ever build and all. I understand all that, but my concern is if we don't look at full build out of projects, that we are going to disincentivize smart new. So I mean, things that weren't even around in 1992 when I started as a planning commissioner. That wouldn't have even been in consideration. We'll disincentivize, the use of smarter growth principles and disincentivize the use of technology in favor of something that on the early phases looks okay, but in the long term doesn't look as good. And so how do we grapple with that here? And that I think that's really important as we look at a long-term plan. It's my first question.
I'm happy to start. So it's a great comment, and I think that's precisely what we're trying to address with option 3.
Yeah.
Right, which is to try to get at this notion that in the long term there are developing communities that have tremendous potential to have lower VMT, particularly because they're adjacent to, they're very close to kind of existing communities. They're close to lots of jobs, and the community itself has lots of jobs and housing that is planned, right? And so I think that is precisely what we're talking about in terms of option 3, as well as option 2, where you could prioritize based off that potential.
Okay. Anybody else?
Director Kennedy, I would just say it's both Congressman Osi, but a lot of other folks that have brought this idea forward, right? And we hear this, I've said to some of you, right now we have partial growth in quite a few developing communities. That's in our plan, and Director Kozlowski knows the pain of this, right, with south of Folsom. But I would say this is for all of you to wrestle with and us to staff you on. Director Kozlowski's earlier comment is right to this point, which is if that is something that the region wants to see for all kinds of reasons, then I think the question is also, we can put that in a spreadsheet, we can model it. And then the question is, how do you actually make that happen? Right. So that's the right side by side. But again, that's why we presented those options, because it's been really clear talking to lots of stakeholders and lots of you that there's a lot of interest in, what would it look like if we had more built out developing communities.
Okay. And then this one isn't nearly as consequential as that, which I think that is really critical that we get our arms around that one. But I'm just from your slides, Dav, is it true that the bike and scooter programs will have more than half of the impacts on GHG reduction than the electric vehicle infrastructure in incentive programs that we local governments are adopting? That's shocking.
It's not that the bike and scooter share are more effective than electric vehicles by any means. It is the challenge that so much of the electric vehicle
is already taken into account by the state?
Is taken into account by the state. So our 19% greenhouse gas is the state's interpretation of, on top of electric vehicles, how much VMT do we need to reduce? And then they acknowledge that what the state's doing is not the be all end all only thing you can do on electric vehicles. So if we can demonstrate that we have investments that will accelerate deployment in our region, we can take credit for those. So that's just the little marginal increase of credit that we take for electric vehicles. But when you compare bike scooter share to EVs, it's a different order of magnitude and impact.
Well, as someone who's about to buy another electric vehicle, I'm glad to hear that.
Buy an electric scooter.
Thank you, Chair.
Exactly. Thought about that. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I know you've been working with stakeholders in all the cities and counties. And I guess between now and May or June, I'm assuming this is like a work in progress and that we're going to come back with an update based on conversations that happen over the next month, or I guess I just wanted to understand, because you said we're going to be moving into the next phase in May. And so does that mean this is our finishing of this, or because this is not complete, right? There's more work to be done on this, more input from stakeholders.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So between now and when we would bring you something in May, we would, to develop if we move on either one of those options, I believe we'd want to give local agency staff another chance to provide any comments on that. Since that's a bit of a change and it'll have implications on them, I think we want to give them a chance to weigh in before that on the land use side. Then there's a ton of outreach still happening, and we've got a handful of meetings already scheduled. We're scheduling a bunch more on the transportation side. That transportation side of the discussion scenario, that's going to continue through May, through June, into September, October, and you wouldn't be acting on that until November. So there's still a lot of back and forth to be had on the discussion scenario as a whole. The land use stuff ideally is a couple of months away from coming to a conclusion with the board. But we'll give local agencies another shot to weigh in on what we're presenting you to here today. We want to make sure that they have another chance to review
Okay.
that.
Yeah. I know that the county will appreciate that, and also the stakeholders. I guess I'm supposed to call you Congressman OC. But you'll be working, is it possible to work with him with this language and look at this language and work on this to include it in the draft?
Yeah, I appreciate, well, Congressman OC and providing the language. It's very much what we have been obviously talking about. Is what we're just talking to Director Kennedy about. We will continue to engage with Congressman OC. I think the options we provided to you this afternoon are very much in line with this. So we'll keep on working on it. And we'll be
Great.
back, yeah.
Director Lozano.
Yeah, just a couple of things. One regarding one of the slides, and I forgot to write the slide number down, but Dav, you talked about developing and potentially developing communities being further away from destinations. Did we look at and gather data related to and consider developing and potentially developing communities as destinations themselves, and what the VMT reduction would have been based on that? And I mentioned to James earlier, we were in Salt Lake City a few years ago now, I guess it's been, and there was a really cool newly developed community out there that was a 15-minute walking community. And I can't remember the name of it. James, do you remember the one?
Daybreak.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I envision. What is the data on that, and how did we consider that?
Yeah, so I mentioned kind of a few examples of developing communities across the region in the discussion scenario where we are kind of ambitious, I guess, with the jobs. Not to get too far into the weeds, but in terms of when we say destinations, in the model, what we're really talking about is jobs. That's essentially how the model works. It's looking at where are people living and then where are they going. And so I don't want to bring our modeling manager up to get too far into it here, but I think that's essentially what we're talking about. And so what the slide that I had earlier, which I don't know if I'm able to get to, right, this sort of job growth question, we absolutely are looking at developing communities becoming more of a destination center, right? And so, and those examples that I mentioned are key. And so a lot of times it requires kind of an anchor. So we mentioned a couple examples there in Folsom, right, with the huge interest in now 3 medical facilities that are looking for now. Thank you. So kind of becoming this kind of agglomerative center of medical space there.
And it sounds like we have some up at Metro Air Park and
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Sac State campus up in Placer County, absolutely.
Okay, thank you for that. And I want to thank staff for all the hard work on this, and this has been a long ride so far. I would agree with Supervisor Frost in that, or Director Frost in that. And I know staff's been working with some of our development community, but I think in looking at this draft language, a lot of it makes sense, like you said, James, and I think that I would ask for support from the rest of the Lunar Committee to have staff work with them on this and see what can be developed from it. Because I think it's important. I think I'd really like to see a spreadsheet on what fully developed community option 3 is, as discussed, because I think that we need all the data. We're going to eventually make that decision as a board, and we need all the data we need to move it forward. And I think that's going to be important. And I recognize at some point there's going to be winners and losers. I think we get paid the big bucks to make these decisions, but be as transparent as we can with our constituents, as well as moving and exploring every option that we have to make those decisions in the end. So again, I would just ask for support on that.
Just to be clear, Director Lozano, Vice Chair Lozano, I think what I'm thinking is it would be great to get your feedback today, and then in the board meeting on April the 18th, you've just said option 3, you'd really like to see that. So any other thoughts before you close today? Because that really is kind of, I think, the spirit of what you have in front of you here. So
Option 3 meaning pathway 3, or option 3 meaning the discussion scenario?
So what we had up here earlier on.
Okay.
Yeah. So
And to be clear, what I mean by that is option 3 is looking at, and I think Patrick or Director Kennedy said it also, is at least examining what, if our scenario needs to be, let's look at built out communities. What does that look like? And using our current discussion scenario as a backstop in the event that it doesn't turn out the way we want it to, or we think it's going to turn out. Or maybe there's something in the middle that we could get to by exploring that.
I second it.
Right. So Director Saragos.
Thank you, and I'm visiting today, but I thought it was important to be here for this sort of inaugural, or at least not inaugural, but at least this next iteration of a discussion. I think the only thing I would say is just to ensure that we're taking a full 360 view of a lot of different opinions and thoughts that may be coming in. I'd be interested to see other folks that maybe have put requests or ideas into us as well. And this is the only one, then that's the only one. But I think this is a large conversation. So just my thoughts on the whole thing.
So on that point, then maybe back to staff, how would we, in the event, assuming that there's no concerns about what's been already put on the table as it relates to kind of a, I think you characterize kind of a sketch level analysis or modeling or spreadsheet that identifies what the partial growth in developing communities or even full growth. Are there other options? I mean, well, obviously we've had a consistent public testimony on representing particular interests. Are there others that would be factored in? Because time is of the essence. We are working under some somewhat self-imposed, well, no, these are timelines that have been imposed on us, not self-imposed. And so we are obligated to, at least as a subcommittee, make hopefully some level of recommendation to the full board for consideration. We want to make sure that today, we had identified today as a day with which staff needed enough meat on the bones, enough clarity around what other questions or what other options do we want to consider. Today and right now would be that time to provide as much clarity around those options so that when we reconvene in May, we have some basis with which to sort of finalize these discussions at some level. So I want to make sure staff has the opportunity to ask whatever questions you have so that as you go forward for the next 30 days, you're asking sort of you've distilled from us, what are those sort of policy questions that we want to incorporate, or what are those other factors?
Yeah, so I think, and Dov, I don't know if there's anything you feel like you would need beyond this to help us with modeling of an option, creating an option 3 here. I think what we'd plan on doing is come back at the board meeting in 2 weeks with this presentation. Sounds like today what we're hearing is we want to proceed with option 3. So what that'll mean is consolidating that 86,000 units in developing community growth, spreading that to fewer developing communities so we can achieve build out in some of those. That'll come to you in May as a spreadsheet. We're gonna make sure that we reach out to local jurisdictions, let them know that we're doing that in case they have input that they want to make sure that we have as we're developing it. It's gonna be a very fast turnaround time because we need to get your item and all of that prepared by the end of this month to get to you for that May discussion. So it'll be a fast turnaround on local agencies, but we've got engagement with them already. So hopefully they can manage that. I think we might have enough with that to run on, but Dov, if
I
there's
guess
more-
I would also just add in, and maybe I'll just read explicitly from the staff report just to make sure that we're very clear that in option 3 here in the staff report, it lays out this consolidation idea that Clint is discussing, where we're kind of assuming more complete build out of developing and potential developing communities in fewer places. What it also says is in order to make the calls around which ones to select, which is a very key decision in that it says prioritize those developing communities that have the strongest likelihood of lower VMT based on the pathways analysis and other factors like adjacency to existing development and potential jobs housing balance. So I guess we would ask that if you have further feedback on that part as well, to let us know.
So, so a clarification, I'm sorry. Director Proskauer. Just so we are at that point contemplating deciding between winners and losers when it comes to all of the options, right? Someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, potentially. I mean, we can't, not everybody gets to win, right?
Right.
Okay, and not everybody gets to lose. Okay. All right, I'm sorry, Director Frost.
Yeah, I guess I already said it. I hope I said it well enough. I feel like I don't have enough information and like everyone, that not all the not all the review and not all the conversations and the input has happened. And so we're making decisions on partial information.
Yeah, there's no decisions today, Director Frost, right? Or at the board meeting. You're giving us feedback, and what we hear is you're interested in some alternative, right? Formations of this, right? That's what we're hearing from you. And you'll have another chance, the full board, in 2 weeks to give us
Okay.
that feedback. We would then go off, do staff work, come back in May and show you what this looks like. I will say, to your point, Chair Villegas, at that point, I don't know that we can have further iterations beyond these and not really begin to lose schedule. So we'll give you some options in May. You give us feedback. Maybe we even bring you a couple of choices in June, but that June adoption is really important to stay on schedule. Is that clear? But you'll have a lot
Yeah.
more information on this in May.
Okay,
And
I
we
just
have
want
a,
everyone to have their input by the time
we
I
do
look
too.
at it.
We do too.
So we can look at the
So,
complete.
so we have a communication out to staff. We wanted to kind of see where you were landing here today
Yeah,
so that we can because we'd love to get staff weighing in on this, right? I mean, Dob just wrote from the staff report, but your staff is really good at knowing, okay, what are some criteria that we should use? So I think we're going to do that, give them a deadline, and then use that input from both staff and stakeholders to come back to you at this committee in May. Committee, Dob, is that May committee? or-
Yeah, committee or board. One thing I would also just note is on the specific stakeholder of local government staff, which is a huge stakeholder. We have been in very strong contact with all of the county staff on this. And we actually also, I don't think we mentioned this, but we have a webinar coming up with all local staff coming up next Friday on the 12th. And so that'll be kind of an open forum for folks to discuss these questions. And then we'll, of course, be working individually with county staff as well.
and you said committee or board, which means the committee won't make a final recommendation to the board?
Committee won't make any recommendations till June. So next month, you won't have to make a formal action on anything. We just want to bring you, if you're interested in this option 3, we'll bring that to you so you can see what it looks like, get your direction there. And then we would absolutely go to the land use committee in June so that you'd be recommending which of those options to move on to the board. Then the full board will make a decision on whether to take that option forward or not.
Got it. Thank you.
Could I just dovetail what Director Frost was saying in terms of the option 3 that we're going to explore in the next few weeks? I think it's important for the board to have all the input so we can make that decision. Also, with the draft language, what do we need to do to make that move at least be explored forward? Do you need anything from this committee to make a commitment to work with the stakeholders on this?
I think the language is suggesting we explore option 3, which is what I'm hearing that you want us to do. I mean, to have language in the MTP SES is about a year and 3 months too soon. So we're not that. I think what Congressman Osi is asking, what you are reiterating is you'd like to explore an option that has more build out greenfield communities and see how they perform. And our answer is, okay, we're giving you that in option 3 because we've been in communication with lots of you and lots of developers. But in terms of, I just want to clarify, Director Lozano, like, I think we can, continue to work with Congressman Osi and many other developers and stakeholders who do have other ideas and views on this, who are not here. But in terms of language in the MTP SES, we're trying to get you a land use scenario to adopt. This idea, this concept is something that we think has a lot of merit and we'll continue to engage on. And then this will actually drive and inform what we'll give you in May. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. We're a little early on it. I just don't want, because I've had a few minutes to review it. I think it's really good, like you mentioned, and I just don't want this to get lost. And then when it comes time to implement this language in the MTP SES, we forget about it. Although I don't think Mr. Osi will let us forget about it, but
I have that sense. I'm getting that sense.
Anyhow,
look,
that's just my concern.
I want to be clear. You're going to get a lot of further input, lots, right? And so you have asked us to engage, listen, be transparent, open up, or show our work. And the reason you had 100 pages in your pack today is we're doing our best to show you our work. This is a really interesting idea. The reason that option 3 is in front of you is frankly because Congressman Osi has raised this concept and it's been echoed, right? So like, it is a really interesting idea. And so we're committed to explore that. But I want to make sure that you all don't get ahead of yourselves in some way, because we come back in May and we show it to you, we come back in June, you're going to discover other things or hear other input. So is it a good idea? Absolutely.
And just to make it clear,
Yeah.
I mean, Mr. Osi isn't the only one that has this idea. I've heard from others on it as well.
I'm responding to the specific language and the idea that we'd be inserting something at this point into a plan that not only have we not yet written, but you haven't even taken an action on for a land use scenario. So I just want to make sure I was clear on that. Is it a good concept? Absolutely. We're going to look into it per your feedback today. Yes.
But for purposes of meeting the obligation that this committee has been assigned, as Director Lozano indicated, we will move incrementally with a parallel backstop so that in the event, we are finding additional information that tweaks our thinking, we can leapfrog from there and move forward from there with recommendations. In the event that we don't, we have a product to deliver to the full board for further consideration. So. You indicated earlier about not to beat it to death, but probably to beat it to death. The idea of the fewer developing communities and how they might perform, I would imagine the analysis would also then include, and if they don't, right? So the consequences of not, it would be obvious, right? I mean, that's going to be readily apparent in your analysis, what you bring forward.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I
okay,
think
okay.
so. We'll even at a sketch level, we'd be able to give you an idea of performance.
I'm asking almost the obvious, but well, you know what? I'm gonna leave it there. Okay.
And then just to make sure we're super clear, what option 3 is, it doesn't change the growth forecast. So the growth forecast the board adopted, this is a reallocation of growth within the developing communities to consolidate.
Right.
Just want to make sure that was.
No, the
super clear.
forecast
It's not
remains the
additive,
framework.
it's
That's right.
And
There's
the
no
idea
getting outside.
there is that if option 3 is something you want to continue to pursue, it would be able to achieve the greenhouse gas reduction target.
It would have
That's
to.
the idea.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I'm assuming, right? That's the intent. Yeah. Okay. Obviously. All right. Very good. Otherwise, Patrick's buying 10 scooters for all of us. Okay, all right. Any other thoughts or questions? No, you guys are good? All right, I think we're finished here.
Chair Villegas, just a super quick, we have our Denver dates. We'd love to have you come June 26th to June 28th. It's a 3 o'clock flight on Wednesday, the 26th. You come back by 5 p.m. Friday, the 28th. Speaking of housing and challenges and greenfield and infill, it's all there in Denver, as Director Kennedy knows.
yeah.
We're going to be seeing a lot of that, a lot of great local hosts. You'll be getting a registration link soon. We're able to offer that trip for board members at 300. So please consider, please join us. And you'll get that information very soon.
And keep in mind, when you go to Denver and you see things that are like really cool, you know, they're heavily reliant on redevelopment dollars we no longer have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I know. Oh, yeah, big time. All right. So with that, parting shot, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.